koutou katoa, ko John Reid Teku ingoa. Welcome to this edition of Water New Zealand's podcast series, Tuara o Te Wai. I'm John Reid from Water New Zealand. Today we're going to talk about local water done well and really sort of where things are at this point when we're recording it in August 2025. We're joined today by two guests, Gillian Blythe and Nick Davis. Gillian is well known to you all as CEO of Water New Zealand. Apart from being central to many of the industry-led discussions about reform of the water industry, she previously worked in the electricity industry and was involved in economic regulation. Nick is a partner at MartinJenkins, an economist and strategic advisor. He's been heavily involved in many of the assessments and investigations to support councils as they transition through the local water done well regime. And also a big official welcome to Emily Afoa, who joins us today as co-host of the podcast. Hannah's taking a break for parental leave. She'll be back, I think, for one more podcast before she finishes up, though. Kia ora, Gillian, Nick and Emily.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thanks for joining us today. Emily, over to you.
Oh, well, tēnei te mihi kia koutou. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be joining Tāwara o Te Wai, and it's really nice to be here with you today, Nick and Gillian. So to start us off, perhaps can you share what the different options are for councils to set up as part of the water reform? Perhaps looking to yourself first, Gillian.
Thank you. So the government has basically said, and this was in legislation that was passed last year, that each territorial authority must prepare a water service delivery plan. And that in preparing that plan, they wanted them to be able to demonstrate publicly how they were going to deliver water services. And so they wanted to be able to be sure that the delivery would meet all of the relevant regulatory quality standards for water services. And I guess we should probably pause and talk about its drinking water, wastewater and stormwater. And that the territorial authority needs to be financially sustainable, and that they need to, in addition to the regulatory requirements, there is an explicit requirement that they meet drinking water quality standards. And then there's a final piece which is around making sure that the water service delivery plan can deal with the growth, so the housing growth and the urban development that's relevant for that council. Ultimately, those plans need to be submitted to the Secretary of the Department of Internal Affairs by the 3rd of September.
Yeah, so a hallmark of local water done well is giving councils choice about how they deliver the services, and broadly that choice boils down to continuing to deliver services in-house, as most councils do today, or establishing a new water company and transferring responsibility for service delivery to that company. So they have both of those options available to them. Under in-house delivery, essentially councils would continue to operate services as they do now. That includes contracting out operations to third parties if they wish, but they will become subject to new planning, reporting and audit requirements, as well as economic regulation by the Commerce Commission. So whilst the service delivery model for those councils changes, it's very much not business as usual because of those new requirements. If they decide to choose and set up a new water organisation, then again they can either do that by themselves or they can join with other councils to form multi-council owned organisations, and we're seeing a number of councils choosing to do that. Essentially those new organisations, they're dedicated water companies. They'll operate under their own piece of legislation that sets out their responsibilities and provides all of the authorities that they need to operate. They would be governed by independent professional directors appointed on a competency basis, and that's quite a significant development because there's actually bans on the appointment of elected members or council staff to those boards. And the organisations have the ability to borrow from LGFA under arrangements that are a lot more liberal than the borrowing arrangements that currently apply for councils. So in effect, they've got much more significant capacity to go out and borrow to make the investment that's required to meet those requirements that Gillian talked about. So once these things are established, then essentially councils would transfer the water assets, liabilities and staff to those new companies, which would then take over the responsibility for making all of the decisions around investment, borrowing and charging customers. So that's quite a significant shift for service provision in New Zealand. But in saying that, it's very similar to the way that water utilities operate in many other jurisdictions.
So that's sort of the background and the framework. Where are we at now? The water service delivery plans are due in early September. We know that most councils have now come to a decision about how they want to proceed. What does that mean for the future of water services in Aotearoa, New Zealand?
Yeah, so we've been closely following the decisions over the last few months, and to be honest, what we're seeing at the moment is a patchwork quilt of providers. So we've got around 42 separate water service providers at last count, which is quite a lot for a country the size of New Zealand. It's interesting to look across the country and see the different configurations. So in total, we've got around 22 councils, or roughly a third of all of the councils that have chosen to keep services in-house. Those councils are concentrated in the South Island and in places like Taranaki and Eastern Bay of Plenty and Tairāwhiti. We've got 6 councils that are proposing to set up their own standalone water organisations in places like New Plymouth, Wairoa, Marlborough, Selwyn, Timaru and Queenstown. And what's interesting about those councils is that a number of them have chosen that option in part because there's an absence of willing partners, and they've indicated that they would consider merging into a larger water company in the future. So that's a stepping stone, if you like, for those councils. But standing back, the majority of councils, by number, around 38 in total, are intending to set up a joint water organisation with between 2 and 6 other councils. So there's a range of different sizes. We'd see under the proposals the establishment of 8 new water companies in the North Island and 3 in the South Island, with the largest being in Wellington, the Wellington metro area, and in the Waikato, the EOI company, which would be a combination of Hamilton and Waikato districts. But you also see some pretty small joint organisations proposed, such as the one in Huranui and Kaikoura in the South Island and on the west coast of the South Island as well. Fair to say it's been quite a dynamic situation over the last few weeks. We've got a number of councils that have been changing their proposals. So it's possible that we may still see some change in the short term, but also councils are running out of time now before those plans are due on the 3rd of September.
That's sort of the patchwork picture. What's the process? What happens next? Gillian, did you want to jump in?
So the 3rd of September is the deadline date. One of the things that the Department of Internal Affairs and the team there have been encouraging is that just as when we were at school, you don't want to submit your homework and then discover that you're not going to pass, is to actually get engagement throughout this last year to understand how the councils are going in terms of those requirements around regulatory compliance and financing and funding sufficiency and those sorts of measures. And so there have been conversations. Some councils have already submitted their plans. So Selwyn District Council submitted theirs, and as Nick has said, that they are setting up a water services CCO. We've also seen for the Hamilton and Waikato, for EOI Flowing Waters that they have submitted their plan and it's been accepted. And I think Waimakariri has also done the same thing, even though that they're going to be a in-house business unit. And so we've got a gradual process where you've got councils submitting their plans for approval, and you've got the DIA. They have a process where they have to consult. So they can consult with government departments, they can consult with the Commerce Commission, with Te Mata Arawai, the Water Services Authority, with Crown Infrastructure Partners, or their new name, National Infrastructure Funding and Finance, and anybody else that the Secretary of the Department of Internal Affairs thinks is appropriate. And so that consultation is happening. What's then occurring is that the department is providing feedback. So as well as, we accept your plan or we reject it and we want you to focus on amendments in these areas, that they are providing some feedback. So part of that is around, because we want these plans not just to be, a document that sits on the shelf and is never looked at after the 3rd of September, but we actually want it to be implemented and to be, for us, all of us, the communities, as well as the broader community, to understand whether we are progressing as expected towards the date at which assets and staff will literally transfer from council into CCOs where appropriate, or into the specifically ring-fenced business unit.
Yeah, so under the legislation, councils are obliged to follow through on implementing their plans. One of the requirements is that the plans include milestones and timelines for implementation, with the expectation that the Department of Internal Affairs will monitor progress. In practice, for councils that are keeping services in-house, that means that they need to gear up to meet the financial ring fencing requirements, including changing their financial strategies and preparing separate financial statements. And they'll need to prepare water services strategy separate from their long-term plans from the 1st of July 2027. So big changes ahead, even for councils that keep services in-house. For those councils setting up new organisations, though, there's quite a big process to go through to transfer responsibility to those companies and to have them ready to operate. They need to set up the new legal entities, and that includes working through things like their constitutions and shareholders agreements and the like. They'll also need to prepare water services strategies, just as councils do. But more particularly, there's a huge amount of work required to identify the assets, debt, staff and contracts that need to be transferred, to develop and enter into transfer agreements with the councils, to employ staff, and then to put the systems and processes in place for operating the services. So what we're seeing is councils are taking a staggered approach to that. You've got some that are aiming to be up and running from the 1st of July next year, while most of the others are targeting 1st of July 2027, which happens to coincide with the start of the next long-term plan cycle. I think the other thing just to note is that even once those companies are set up and operating, it's quite likely that for a period of time we will see them continuing to rely on councils for certain services like billing, for example, until such time that they're really ready to take on the full set of responsibilities.
So obviously we hope that all those plans will be good and robust, but what happens if one of those plans doesn't meet the requirements?
So within the legislation, there is provision for the Secretary of the Department of Internal Affairs to put in place a Crown facilitator or a Crown Water Services specialist. And I guess the best way of thinking about those is that it is, at one end of that spectrum, it is a facilitator, it's a mediator who can try and find some common ground. So you might have a couple of councils that initially had planned to come together, and then for one reason and another, and some of this might be reflecting the fact that we are approaching a local government body elections, that weren't able to reach the goalpost, and score that try in terms of agreeing to be a joint CCO. And so if there is that, it's more like, as I said, the mediation, that's there. Alternatively, there is the more heavier-handed stick, which is around being able to step in and actually make decisions on behalf of the council.
So we've heard around the absence of willing partners, the challenges of setting up a new process. What are some of the other factors that have been influencing decisions?
I think at its heart, part of this goes back to the name of the policy, which is local water done well. And you will have, for some regions across the country, where the need and the desire to have water services to be delivered locally, as in within the existing council boundaries, is something that for communities, they want to feel that they've got the control of their destiny and the decisions that they're making. So I think that's part of it. I think if you dig into that, what are we really talking about? We're talking about that, across different parts of the country, more investment is required than in other places. Everywhere needs investment, but it's around how much is that going to cost? How many of the existing wastewater treatment plants in a particular area are non-compliant? And that conversations that you can imagine happens across a wider district in terms of did they or did they not spend the right amount of money over the last couple of decades? And so part of it is around the concern by some councils around, are they going to be incurring debt on behalf of their neighbours? Now, within the construct that's there in the legislation, there's nothing that says on day one, the prices that we charge in Council A and Council B need to be the same. There's no requirement for price harmonisation. Certainly the different jurisdictions have been talking about, at some point, is price harmonisation the right answer? And if it is the right answer, is that at year 5? Is that at year 7? Is it year 10? Or some further down the track? That sort of piece. And so I think those sorts of components have been part of the reasons why we've seen a less incentive or less of a desire from some councils to join with their neighbours.
Yeah, if I could just add too, we've worked with a number of councils throughout this process, and the observation that I would make is that the councils have taken this pretty seriously. They've taken a lot of advice, they've done a lot of analysis around their own water services in terms of understanding their current position and what that looks like through time. But Gillian's sort of right, there is quite a wide range of factors that enter into the decision making. You've got the basic economics being, what investment is there to do? Can they fund and finance it? And is it going to be affordable for their communities? But then you have all of the other, dimensions around who gets to make decisions, that sort of control and influence question. But also for the smaller councils, will the rest of their council remain viable when you take out quite a large component of their activity? So those are some of the other factors that need to be balanced, and there are trade-offs between them, which is why councils haven't found it easy to make these decisions.
There's the number of different models that are in place or that are possible for councils to take forwards, but what are the ingredients? What are some of the factors that feed into a good multi-council partnership for water services?
There's a lot to that question, but I think it starts fundamentally with good governance. That's the number one priority for council groups proposing joint water models, is to get a high quality board and management team in place. It also is going to require councils to get on the same page and convey realistic expectations to those boards, recognising that it's going to take time for the companies to mature. And the other key ingredient I'd highlight is culture. There's a lot of knowledgeable, experienced capability in the sector, both within councils and in the supply chain. However, as a collective, the current industry has been quite short-term in focus. And it hasn't had an investor save or customer first mentality, and that's been a product of the of the institutional settings within which they've been operating, and the lack of regulation. So those are some pretty significant cultural shifts that need to be made, but that's the opportunity essentially of local water done well, is to really lift the horizons and start to think long term when it comes to these investment decisions.
Gillian, so what are some of the challenges that you've seen in terms of actually implementing local water done well, particularly across multi-councils?
I think some of this goes to what are the arrangements that you're able to bring together. So do you have someone within the existing group of councils who's likely to be your chief executive? Do you need to go out and formally recruit? Is that an international recruitment process? Is that just a domestic? Is it a closed pool to those existing councils? Then I think there is probably actually before that, you need to be able to have at least your establishment board, and then be in the process of gradually building up to, likely an 8-person board by the time that you are responsible for the assets. And I think some of this is about making sure you understand what systems you've got. So do you have, in a multi-council, does someone already have an asset management system that is good, it's fit for purpose, it's appropriate, in which case you can lift and shift, and then you're just bringing in a new council into that system? Or are we basically saying that amongst the councils that we're talking about, that actually no one system is very good, so you need to go and procure something new? And then you've got to be able to start transferring data over. And so some of this is around what needs to happen ahead of one, if on the assumption that this multi-CCO is starting on 1 July 2026, what has to happen beforehand, or what can happen afterwards? What do you need to have some shared services with your council owners? Are there meters for all of your connections? At what point are you going to be able to bill a customer, you and I, as a customer within that CCO? Have you got a contract arranged? Do you have a way of articulating what the levels of service are that you and I can understand, as opposed to what your council owners have understood in the delivery of water services over the last, X decades? And so there are a whole bundle of things that need to be thought about. We should throw into that. You need to make sure you've got insurance. You need to make sure you've got a bank account. You need to make sure that you've got not just a bank account, but you've arranged for some, effectively an overdraft, that transactional banking relationship, as well as being able to ensure that you've got, an understanding around the local government funding agency, so LGFA, of the debt that you're going to be getting. Because the expectation, I suspect, for most is that you'll just be getting a share of what's required from council, but that might at some point need to be sculptured, and what's the right way to think about that? So there's a whole bundle of things that need to be thought about, between now and day one, and part of that is around what's required for that minimum viable product, to make sure that when you and I turn the tap on in the morning, water comes out, and when we flush the toilet, the waste gets taken away, or the stormwater gets managed.
That's really interesting, Gillian. Thank you. You've outlined a number of the challenges that we can see ahead in the establishment of some of these organisations. Flipping into a positive framing, a question that I've been asked recently is, are you optimistic about the future? I'd love to hear both your thoughts on this. Perhaps Nick, yourself first.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. Like a lot of people, I've been on this journey for quite a long time, probably about 5 years or so, and gone through the ups and downs of water reform through that period. I do believe that on the whole, having independently governed, well-regulated water companies is likely to deliver better outcomes for customers and communities. And so it is really pleasing from my perspective to see the proposals to put those models in place in regions like Northland, Waikato, Hawke's Bay, Wellington, west coast of the South Island, and Otago. That's progress. And it's also good to see the Commerce Commission being equipped with a modern regulatory toolkit. So those developments make me more optimistic that in those parts of the country, we will start to tackle the infrastructure deficit, and that will see improved levels of service and the delivery of services more cost efficiently. And so that's very much a positive story from my point of view.
Kia ora. And Gillian, are you optimistic about the future?
I am optimistic. I mean, there are moments, I think, when all of us have some hesitancy, but I think, as Nick has said, what we have got is a regulatory environment that is increasingly getting the flesh on the bones. So the Water Services Authority Te Mata Arawai, they are being increasingly clear about their compliance monitoring and enforcement framework and what they are expecting from councils, in-house business units, or these CCOs or joint CCOs by a set date. And I think that raising the bar and being clear about what's expected is really important, because if you're sitting there either as a director of one of these water utilities, because that's ultimately what they are, there might be legally council controlled organisations, but they're a water utility, and you're able to see what you are required to do. And I think the same thing in terms of, as Nick's mentioned, the Commerce Commission and the toolbox that they're going to have, that's really important. The piece that I'm looking forward to seeing, and I think it's really necessary, is actually that we get the investment beginning to happen. Because it's one thing for the regulatory or the legislative or the legal geeks amongst us to be going, the framework is there, but unless we actually start delivering the investment, we're not going to see the water services delivered in a way that ensures that we are getting healthy water every day, and that the environment, whether as a consequence of wastewater discharges into water or onto land, or in terms of the stormwater management, is whether that's appropriate. And so I think when we start seeing an uptick in investment, then I will be even more optimistic than just looking at the regulatory or legislative framework piece.
And Emily, I'd be really interested in hearing how you answered that question when you were asked it.
Oh, thank you. I have less detailed knowledge than Nick and Gillian, but my answer was I am optimistic. The same piece, we need to invest in our infrastructure. The focus on community well-being feels really positive. The pathway in getting there may be challenging. There's a lot of organizational structure to go through, but I also feel really positive in connecting with our peers in the sector. Everyone is trying to achieve good outcomes for both our waterways and for ourselves as tangata. So I feel optimistic, even if it's perhaps seeing a slightly challenging road ahead. What about yourself?
Again, I think I'm optimistic for the future, particularly as we get to see that investment coming through in a more sort of structured and a little bit more sort of 21st century water organisations in New Zealand. So yeah, looking forward to that position when we get there.
I think another piece that I would add is that when I joined the water sector 5 years ago, if you spoke to somebody in the street about water, they would probably look at you a bit quizzically. And they would be, what do you mean water? Is that somewhere where I could have a career? Is that somewhere, that I could aspire to be part of? And who delivers water? I felt from the people that I was talking to, as I walked down Lambton Quay, that there wasn't that visibility. I think if you went and had the equivalent conversations in 2025, there is a far greater understanding of the fact that water services are currently provided by councils. There is a need to invest. There is the possibility that you could have a career in water and those sorts of pieces. And I think that's all part of the journey towards becoming a more efficient, dynamic, effective water services sector for New Zealand.
Thank you, Gillian and Nick, for joining Emily and myself today. It was great to talk to you both about the changing landscape of the New Zealand water industry. I'm sure we'll come back with another podcast on this topic towards the end of the year, as so much is changing. And thank you for listening to this latest episode. We're back next month with our next podcast.